We are very pleased to be joined by Katie Phang. You may have seen her on Fox News as a legal analyst, also a partner at Berger Slingerman out of Miami, Florida. Here to talk about legal issues, but also what's been going on with this crazy case involving the escaped prisoners in New York. Good morning to you, Katie. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Brian. I'm happy to be here.
Well, listen, this 18-day search stretches on. They still haven't found these people up there, but it's beginning to look like this is a very complicated case, and perhaps as interesting as the search is also the investigation as to how these guys were able to pull this off.
Oh, it's gotten a little bit insane. We just found out yesterday that the tools, the hacksaw blades, the screwdriver bits, things like that these escapees used to get out of the prison, smuggled in nothing less than frozen hamburger meat. Who knew? In violation of prison policy, they did not go through the metal detector, courtesy of Joyce Mitchell, and Joyce is singing like a canary now, and she's implicated another guard that worked there as a corrections officer, this guy by the name of Gene Palmer, saying that he's the one who got the meat from the tailor shop freezer and gave it to the escapees.
Now, is there any suggestion that we've heard this story that promises were made to these guards who helped them, but is there any indication that there were some bribes or anything like that in place?
From what we understand thus far, there hasn't been any indication that any cash was in play, but let's be frank, when you're in prison, you don't necessarily have that as commerce, right? And that's not currency you can use, so who knows what could be used for purposes of a bribe. This woman, looks can be deceiving, I guess, huh? I mean, she definitely had an investigation into her alleged sexual relationship with the prisoner Sweat, and then she confirmed to the police that she did have a sexual relationship with the other escapee with the last name of Matt. And so she definitely took some time to get to know the inmates at this prison.
Yeah, getting full service there as a guard. Okay, listen, the other situation is apparently they have found a cabin where these guys were at one point. We know this because they found DNA evidence that suggests that indeed they were there.
Yeah, and it's not just for one, it's for both. The quick turnaround, which you get when you're law enforcement operating at that level, turns out there's DNA from both of the men found at this hunting camp. Fascinatingly, it's only 20 miles away from this prison, and there's been an intense manhunt. So these guys have been pretty wily and pretty skillful at evading the law enforcement that's been scouring the area. But they found bloody socks there, boots for one of the inmates, which suggests that maybe he's now without shoes trying to escape the police. Yeah,
apparently somebody came to the cabin, the owners of the cabin came to the cabin and scared them off is the working theory.
Yeah, and what's interesting, too, is that this is, and what people need to understand, what the listeners need to understand, is this is an incredibly rural area. So these hunting camps, there's several of them, and law enforcement has indicated that these two escapees followed a railroad track and power lines. So these guys are actually pretty smart, and we do know one of them had previously escaped to Mexico from jail, did his own prison break, killed somebody in Mexico, and then got extradited back to the United States, and that's what he was back in prison for, including murdering his boss.
Well, we'll continue to watch that one with great interest. I want to turn our attention now, if we could, over to Baltimore and this prosecutor in the Freddie Gray case by the name of Marilyn Mosby. Oh, she's getting the full Vogue treatment. She's showing up in the magazine Vogue and with all of the Annie Leibovitz pictures taken of her and all that. But, I mean, there are real questions about how she has performed and whether she has performed appropriately as the prosecutor in this case. As someone who understands the law, what's your take on Marilyn Mosby and the way she has behaved in this particular matter?
Well, I've spent half my career as a prosecutor, and lawyers, by all accounts, have to have a certain high ethical standards. But when you're a prosecutor, it has to be bar none. And she's definitely comported herself in a way that suggests that she's not doing it with the professionalism that she should do. And I've made it perfectly clear on Fox News and that I'm very disappointed in her behavior. She's pretty much said she doesn't want to try this case in the media, but it's effectively what she's done. And now we've seen that her own office, although she says otherwise, but somebody's leaked the autopsy report before the criminal defense attorneys who are defending these 6 officers were even able to see it. The deadline is this Friday, Brian, for her office to turn over the evidence. And so now we know that the ME's office has looked at, Freddie Gray's body and has determined that his injuries are you ready for this?
Yep.
Medically and legally consistent with an accident. However, they're saying that because the cops failed to follow safety procedures, that it's actually a homicide through acts of omission. I mean, that's a stretch. That's going to be a hard battle for her in court.
Yeah, let me go into that just a little bit.
Sure.
That apparently, the autopsy suggests that it wasn't anything that the officers did, but it's what they didn't do. They're suggesting that they should have buckled him up, should have been more careful about him. They also, by the way, found that Freddie Gray had traces of opiates and marijuana in his bloodstream.
Yeah, the tox report that came back from when he was admitted to the trauma center indicates there were not only opiates but cannabinoids. And, listen, cannabis can stay in your system for a while, so there's no indication that he had just smoked pot before he had been arrested and before he passed away. Well, actually, he passed away a week after he was in the hospital. But the opiates are interesting because they don't stay in the system for as long as the cannabis does. And so the opiates could be anything. Could be OxyContin, could be Percocet. I mean, it could be anything. And so we don't know, but he definitely had that in his system when he encountered the police on the streets in Baltimore.
All right, now, if you are a lawyer for the police officers that are charged in this matter, and the autopsy report suggests that that he was involved in something that was an accident, how does that work to your favor or your advantage or disadvantage?
Well, there is a burden of proof that the state has, and it's always the state's burden. It's never on the defense. And the state has to prove beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt that these officers committed the crimes for which they have been charged. And the state has to prove every element of the crimes that they are currently facing by way of this indictment. And so if you're the defense attorneys, you're going to say to a jury, if it even gets that far, frankly, that, look, even the medical evidence, which you can't manipulate, right? The medical evidence shows that this was actually an accident. Nobody has said that policies weren't followed, but maybe that's just a really bad civil lawsuit, and maybe there's liability in terms of cash damages, and let's be honest, we also know that's a definitive thing. She's already been put on notice. That city's been put on notice that they're going to be sued. So maybe it's just at worst a bad civil lawsuit, but does it rise to the level of criminal liability? And most of us, including myself, say no.
And it certainly doesn't rise to the level of being considered anything close to a homicide, does it?
No, and it's bad, and it's tragic that he died, because nobody should have to die because they took a ride in a van on their way to the jail lockup. But to prove that level of intent, because crimes like homicide and murder, those are specific intent crimes. You have to show a specific level of intent to harm, to kill. Not even harm, to kill. And I don't think that they're going to be able to prove that in court.
And so ultimately, do you think that these 6 officers will emerge unscathed in this whole matter?
Well, they're going to have to change venue. I don't think they're going to get a fair trial if it stays in Baltimore. And, she's definitely helping. She, as in the prosecutor, she's helping that case along for the defense. Do I think that people are going to drop by the wayside along the way? Remember, there's 6 cops that are charged, and every one of them had a different level of involvement vis-a-vis Freddie Gray. And so as the evidence comes out, and frankly, whether it's leaked or not, we'll be able to see what type of case truly exists against each of them, because right now they're looked at as a collective whole. But they each have their own lawyers, and even though right now they may be having 1 or 2 lawyers speaking on their behalf collectively, they each are going to defend themselves on their own.
It certainly looks as if what they did was more political than legal by going after those 6 cops. The autopsy report was prepared and done the day before she announced the charges. Yeah. I don't know how, if you're doing a thorough investigation, and she claims she started from day one, okay, I get it, and that's great that you do an independent investigation with your office. But you need to take that autopsy report, and you need to consider that with the facts that you know at that time. It's an amazing rush to go and to publicly announce what you're going to do to these people, and to say that you've heard the voices of the youth in Baltimore. I know.
I mean, that's really putting yourself out there. Who are you advocating for? You can't pick out and isolate a certain group of the community that way.
Well, Katie, thank you so much for bringing your assessment to this. We really appreciate you joining us this morning.
Well, it's a pleasure. I look forward to hearing from you guys again.
Okay, we'll call.